Australia, the sixth largest country on Earth. An ancient, rugged, and unforgiving land with abundant animal life, both beautiful and deadly. Found within its awe-inspiring landscapes and natural beauty exists a deep history of unexplained mysteries for anyone with the courage to investigate them. Tonight, we join Ben on a journey across this vast island continent in search of answers to events that have reshaped the lives of so many that have been exposed to Unexplained Phenomena Australia. With your host, Ben Hurl.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unexplained Phenomena Australia. This week, I will continue to examine Australia's alien abduction history. Now, if you listened in last week, you would agree that there has been a long and consistent alien abduction agenda here in Australia. And it's far more than can be possibly covered in one episode. And I was only going to do a single episode on the topic, but my research quickly showed me that there was just so much material out there, all of it fascinating, and it raises many more questions than we have answers. So already we have seen many of the classic features of the alien abduction phenomena in last week's episode, plus some unique qualities that highlight the individuality of some encounters. The circumstances, the beings, what happened, and the after effects are all very similar, yet also different at the same time. The age range, the backgrounds of abductees represent all levels of Australian society. And this week, we'll focus particularly on two strange encounters. And if I have time, I'll cover off on some others as well. And the first one we're going to look at is the case of Scott and Wendy Longley, who had an encounter near Casino in New South Wales, up on the border with Queensland in 1996. And we're also going to take a look at another case, which is a rather controversial case. It's been sort of claimed to be a hoax, and it got a lot of publicity at the time when it happened, and that's the controversial Amy Rylance abduction, which occurred in Gundyr, Queensland in 2001. So both cases are very complex, and I think you'll find that the details of each should fascinate and intrigue you as well. And I've got a couple of audio recordings from both cases that we'll have a listen to so you can hear the witnesses themselves speaking. And so what happened? So the first one we'll talk about will be the Scott and Wendy Longley case. So on March 16, 1996, Scott and Wendy Longley and their two toddler children were driving back from a day spent with close friends in Lismore, New South Wales. And they bid their friends goodbye at about 7 p.m. And before the 2-hour drive, they ate at Hungry Jack's, or Burger King as it's known in America, in Lismore. And it was dark by the time they started driving west towards Casino. And according to their own story, it was about 5 kilometres from Casino when Scott noticed two strange lights in the vehicle's rearview mirror. And at the same time, Wendy noticed more lights in front of and to the left of the car. And she described that as being 200 or so fairy lights, and they were white and a bright green in colour. There's a strange aspect to this case already. I haven't sort of heard of that before in any other cases. Nothing else seemed to happen, but the family reported arriving home much later than usual. and not understanding why so much time had passed from when they had left Lismore, seeing the lights, and arriving at their home. They didn't have to wait long for strange symptoms to start affecting them. The next day, Scott developed a strange blister on his toe, and the whole family claimed to have had what was described as flu-like symptoms and nosebleeds, when they'd always been a picture of good health. A visit to a hypnotherapist recommended by UFO Society followed, and Scott recalled vivid details under hypnosis of two tall beings about 2 meters in height, with small ears, big black eyes, 2 dots for a nose, a small mouth with no lips. It's a fairly well-known description, isn't it? And he recalled them taking him, Wendy, and their daughter, Bronwyn, from the car. So there was 4 of them in the car, but he recalls them taking 3 of them out of the car. He said, then they carried me around to the back of the car, laid me down on my stomach, and one entity held my head off the ground. Still watching from above, I saw the aliens with me use something like a silver staple gun, and they pressed it into my neck. He said he found he could communicate telepathically to the aliens, who told him that they were a lost family. So he said, I can recall thinking of the aliens, what beautiful people. So there's some fascinating concepts going on there as well. The idea of them being a lost family, and that these aliens that have come who've seen them are a beautiful people. Moments later, after seeing a crowd of some 200 aliens, Scott suddenly found himself lying on what seemed to be an operating table. So this other memory is of a big gathering. 200 aliens would be a large gathering in anyone's book, I would have thought. And there was a strange set of lights to my left, and above me there were 3 round lights. I also noticed a mechanical arm at one end of the table, which had 4 claws to it. Then, after exclaiming that he wanted to return to his family, he was suddenly back in the car. So Scott undertook many more regressions, hypnosis sessions, and recalled further details of the night in question, and even other apparent alien abduction and examinations throughout his lifetime, specifically when he was 4, 8, and 14 years old. So the family continued to experience other strange symptoms and abilities, some which were permanent. These included seeing strange lights and spots, presumably in front of his eyes, experiencing strange dreams and fears, being able to read people's emotional states, and knowing who is calling when the phone rings. So, I mean, people have that as well too. Plus, you can sometimes see on your phone who it is. But back in 1996, that certainly wouldn't have been the case. Mobile phones didn't exist at that time, but he perhaps has had that foresight to know who's calling. I wonder if that's continuing today. So this case is relatively old now. It's 3 years after the Kelly Cahill encounter, putting it on an abduction timeline. So it's interesting to wonder whether that's still continuing for him. And the story did receive widespread media coverage at the time, and stories surfaced of people seeing strange lights on that night of March 16th in the Lismore, New South Wales casino area. So we'll have a little bit of a look at some other things that I've got here. So I'll just come up here just to give you some. So where are we? Back up to the top. So this is where casino is. This is it here. So if you have a look and are familiar with Australia, Australians will be. If you're listening in from overseas, then the casino area is near Byron Bay. Now, Byron Bay is a very well-known area of Australia. It's It's a bit of an alternative, has a strong alternative hippie type of a feel to it. I've been there a couple of times, and it's a really beautiful location. So casino is just near there. So it's just down from Brisbane, the Gold Coast, and Queensland. And in that map, you can just see the white line of the border there between New South Wales and Queensland. It's above Coffs Harbour, well above Sydney and Canberra. So it's right up there in northern New South Wales. Now, this picture here also gives you a bit of an idea where they were. So I'm not sure which route he took because Google will throw multiple routes at you, but there's Lismore and Casino. So that's kind of, they're not that far apart. And according to Google, it's about a half-hour trip, 37 kilometres. So, and about 5 kilometres out of Casino, that's where they had the encounter. So that's the level of detail that I could actually find. And this is Scott. So that's Scott Longley. And the other thing you've got to remember too, that also this case pretty much occurred right around the time of the X-Files really too. So that 96, 97, you know, all those years of the X-Files. So this was happening right at that time. And this is his wife, Wendy, as well. So, and what I'm about to show you now is an excerpt of an interview that they actually did on TV. And this is all part of the publicity that this case generated. I don't really remember it at the time myself. This case didn't register bells with me at the time. Probably didn't even see this particular interview because this interview would have been done on a daytime television show, so a morning show, the Kerry Ann Kennelly show. The lady in green there is the interviewer, and her name is Kerry Ann Kennelly. She's not on TV now, but back in '96 she had quite a popular morning breakfast or mid-morning show on TV. So she had both Scott and Wendy on this particular episode. So we'll have a bit of a listen to it. It's also interesting the way that she approaches it is quite good. She seems to have a healthy skepticism about the encounter, which is very common with media people. And that's at the better end of the scale. You can get outright derision and ridicule at the other end. So she's politely listens to their story, and she does a pretty good job of it, I think. Even though there's perhaps just a little hint of humor and not disbelief. I think she believes that they believe what happened to them, and have a bit of a listen to that as we go through too. So I'll just start that now. So an interesting encounter from the fact that it's, basically driven from a car. So they've been abducted while in transit. And it's probably the catalyst, this case, for the memories in the particular case of Scott, who's had apparent abductions. It doesn't say whether Wendy's had ongoing abductions or whether her and the children were there at the time and that's just the way it happened to be. Or since they've become abductees as well. So I'll press start and So there you go. That's the experience of the Longleys. So yeah, the interview's done. I think, as you'll agree, it's sort of done pretty well for the most part. And Kerry Ann's sort of skepticism is kept under control. You can see that a lot worse in other interviews. The Knowles family one is a great example of that, where they were very much ridiculed during their Nullarbor plane experience in 1988. So the Longleys had a relatively good experience with Kerry Ann Kennelly, and it's a fascinating case. I should perhaps try and track them down. It can be hard to find people after all these years, which I'm finding at the moment when I'm trying to chase people up for these old cases. Very hard to find people, so it's challenging. And so while that case is very much sort of almost textbook abduction in some ways, this next one that we're going to talk about, which has been branded a hoax, is a lot different to the Longley experience. And that is the case of Amy Rylance. So it achieved a huge amount of publicity at the time. And I do remember this case back in the early 2000s. It received enough publicity that it really rivaled the Kelly Cahill encounter of August 1993 in the fact that it got so much publicity. And it was remarkable for many reasons, which we will discuss in details. And like the Kelly Cahill case, it remains surrounded in unanswered questions and is also frustratingly incomplete in many ways. And even though it has been declared a hoax, the events and those involved make for a fascinating examination. And again, I'd like to try and find Amy and the others associated with it to talk to them about it. Again, a difficult task to do so many years later. And it's another good sort of, it shows you what human nature is like as well. How people will behave around the whole phenomenon of alien abduction, UFOs. Is there the potential to make money out of this? And I think that's often quite a misconception out there with people, that you can make a lot of money out of it, and that's very hard to achieve. You can get some TV interviews, you might be able to write a book, you might get a documentary made, and that's at the extreme end of success for this type of thing. But all too often, what people face is they face more ridicule and disbelief rather than belief, depending on the set of circumstances. So this story is one that I do approach with caution, but it's interesting nonetheless. So what happened? On Thursday, October 4th, 2001, at a place called Gundia, near Tiaro in Queensland, uh, something very unusual happened. And there were three people directly involved in the events. There was Keith Rylance, who was 39 at the time. The principal was Amy, his wife, who was 22, so relatively young, and their business partner, Petra Heller, who was 35. And they were on this property, which was being developed at the time into a winery called Whispering Winds. Now, I did a bit of research trying to find any wineries in that area, and today in 2022, there are no wineries that exist up there. So it perhaps failed as a business venture. And just before I move on, we'll have a bit of a look at that too. So this is where it's located. So this place is sort of up near the sort of the Sunshine Coast, I suppose, in that area north of Brisbane, heading up that way, and a couple of other pictures here just to sort of give you, yeah, so it's north of the Sunshine Coast, where that little red dropper is. In the middle of nowhere, I hopped onto Google Maps and had a look around, and this is just a farming area. There's not sort of really much in the way of a town, just a little hamlet, a gathering of houses in this area. So you can see down there to the bottom of the map where it says Gundia. That's where the location is. Very rural, and this is the actual. So when you zoom in onto the town itself, there's really not much there. It literally is just a isolated part of Queensland, sitting there, not that far away from the coast. So that's the area there. It's very interesting. So what actually happened in that particular case? It was a nighttime encounter, and Keith Rylance said that they had gone to sleep in a caravan bedroom at about 9:30 p.m. And Petra retired to her bedroom in the caravan annex, and Amy stayed on the couch watching TV in the caravan annex lounge room. And each of these locations were in close proximity to one another, separated by a window and a wall, respectively, from the lounge room. Petra's room had a door leading to the lounge room, which was left ajar, and the door to the bedroom where Keith was apparently was also open to the lounge room. And Amy fell asleep on the couch. And there was also a storm at that time on that night around 9:30. So they were all basically very close together in this little caravan, or I think they call them trailers in America, sort of like a trailer park living sort of thing. And so around 11:15, Petra, their business partner, was woken up when she entered the adjacent lounge, and she was confronted by an extraordinary sight. And this sight overwhelmed her with fear. A rectangular beam of light was being projected through the open window of the caravan lounge room. And this light beam appeared to be truncated at the end. And inside the beam, Petra claimed to have seen Amy in a sleep-prone position, so presumably lying like that, being carried out headfirst through the window. Underneath her, also within the beam, were the items that had been on the coffee table adjacent to the couch that Amy had been on. So not only has Amy been picked up, that, presumably coffee cups and cigarette lighters or whatever else is laying around has been picked up in the beam also. Now, before apparently fainting in shock, Petra saw that the beam was coming from a disc-shaped UFO hovering just above the ground a short distance away. And this was near a tree at the rear of the clear section immediately behind the annex of the caravan or trailer. Now, Petra reports she believes she was only fainted for a short period of time. Regaining consciousness, she began screaming. So quite a high stress level environment, really. And Keith reported that he was awoken by the commotion coming from Petra. And as he came from the caravan bedroom and stepped down into the lounge room, Keith claimed he was confronted by the sight of a highly agitated Petra and the contents of the coffee table on the floor in front of the window. So he realised the window screen was torn in both a vertical fashion and along the bottom of the window frame. And Keith indicated that initially he couldn't get any sense out of Petra, who was crying and very agitated. So he rushed outside trying to locate Amy. And she was reportedly nowhere to be found. And Keith states that when he started to be less agitated himself, he was eventually able to get from Petra an idea of what had actually happened. And Keith claimed that he initially refused to believe what Petra was telling him. He said he rushed outside again, trying to find his wife, Amy. And eventually, as the situation became clearer, Keith indicated that he decided to call the police. So here we have a very apparent, alleged, strange set of events. High agitation, broken window, broken flywire screen on the window, contents presumably strewn across the floor, and a missing 22-year-old woman. So Keith called the Tiaro police, which is that little town just north of where they were, at about 11:40 p.m. And he reported that his wife had been abducted, and he was imploring that the police should come out. So this all actually happened. And with the manning status at the station at the time, it meant that there was some delays to the police being able to actually get out there. But about an hour and a half after the initial call, a senior constable, Robert Maragana from Tiaro, and an officer from nearby Maryborough arrived at their location. Now, initially, the police thought that they might have been walking into a situation involving foul play, even perhaps a murder scene. But then the bizarre circumstances of the alleged events came into focus for the police. And that's almost got those little similarities to the Travis Walton case, where he was missing and that sort of did turn into a murder investigation. And the two people, Keith and Petra, were claiming that Amy had been abducted by a spaceship, and the officers were struggling to keep an open mind. And the police on site were later joined by a Sergeant John Bosnack, and he was the officer in charge of the Tiaro police force. And he'd been asleep when the police called him in to assist in the investigation. Now, the three officers continued their investigation at the property, and they confirmed that Keith Rylance and Petra Heller appeared to be in an agitated state, and that there was literally no sign of Amy Rylance, and the torn screen was examined by the police. A flowering bush, which was commonly known as yesterday, today, tomorrow, was located immediately outside the left side of the window, and that had indications of possibly being affected by heat or another mechanism along the right side of the bush. And oddly enough, another flowering bush, a hibiscus, located on the right-hand side of the window, was not affected in the same way. And the police did take samples of the bush, or presumably the bushes, for later testing. Now, while the police were at the property, a phone call came through, which was taken by Keith Rylance. So this is going to be after midnight by this particular time. And a woman was calling from Mackay, a lot further up the Queensland coast, indicating that she had taken a somewhat distressed and apparently dehydrated young woman from a gas station, or a petrol station, as we say in Australia, on the northern outskirts of the central Queensland city of Mackay, which is 790 kilometres to the north of that area. Now, the young woman that she'd picked up was Amy Rylance, and the female caller was ringing to advise that Amy was apparently all right and was now at the Mackay Hospital. And she had been examined by a doctor. And Keith handed the phone to Senior Constable Maranagara. Given these extraordinary circumstances, the Mackay police were called in, making a total of 3 police stations involved in this investigation. You had Tiaro on the outskirts of central Queensland, Maryborough on the coast, and Mackay, some 790 kilometres to the north of the Gundia-Tiaro area. And a statement was notarised by the Mackay police with a Justice Act acknowledgement that required Amy to acknowledge that what she had stated was true to the best of her knowledge and belief, and that if it is admitted as evidence, that she may be liable to prosecution if she had indicated anything that she knew was false. So this statement indicated that she'd made to the Mackay police that she was only recollected lying on the couch of the property. She had no recollection of the events that Petra described of her being in a sleep-prone position and being taken out through the window. Had no memory of that at all, but claimed she next remembered waking up lying on a bench in a strange rectangular room. And illumination came from the walls and the ceiling, which is quite a common description in alien abduction encounters, that there's no light globes or anything like that. The walls tend to illuminate. She woke up in this room and she was alone. Now, she indicated that she called out and heard what seemed to be a male voice asking her to be calm and that everything would be all right and that she would not actually be harmed. Another common trait of abduction reports. Soon an opening appeared in the wall and a guy, she described him as a guy, about 6 feet tall, walked into the room. And this man appeared to be slender in build, but in perfect proportion, covered head to foot in a full bodysuit. He had what seemed to be a black covering mask on his face with a hole for his eyes, nose and mouth. And he repeated his calming assurances. Amy felt that she had been there for a while. Now, the man told her that they were returning her to a place not far from where she had been taken. And because the lights were wrong at the property and it wasn't safe, she then indicates she found herself lying on the bed and falling asleep. The next thing she recollects is that she woke up on the ground with trees around her. She felt disorientated, could smell the ocean, and indicated she was not sure how long she tumbled through the bushland, but seemingly it was for a long time. And she felt like she wasn't making much progress. So she's walked through the bush or the forest, and she's come out onto a road that looked like a highway and saw a light from a gas / petrol station. She walked into the station where staff, seeing her state, tried to offer her some assistance. She accepted some water and she felt somewhat dehydrated. Now, initially, she was not able to answer identifying questions and didn't know where she was, so very disorientated. She was asked by the staff at the gas station, was she drunk or was she affected by drugs? To which she said no. And Amy indicated that she felt tired, sore, drained, and lethargic after this experience. She asked a woman at the service station to take her to the hospital, as she didn't know of where else to go. The woman and her friend took Amy to the Mackay Hospital. And later on, Amy spoke with 2 police officers and also spoke with her husband, Keith, from the hospital. She then went to Mackay Police Station, where she gave the statements of the events. And Amy also indicated that this sort of thing had never happened to her before. But when she was in her 5th year at school, she had seen a large UFO surrounded by smaller objects. The police arranged to put Amy into a motel pending the arrival of her husband. He and Petra arrived during the day and indicated that they spent considerable time with Amy discussing what had happened. And there were extensive notes were made and photographs were taken of the triangular arrangement of marks on Amy's inner right thigh, marks on each of her heels, and the growing out of her hair, which had been dyed earlier in the week. Her hair had apparently started to show her former colour, so suggesting that some considerable time had passed for her, indicating more than a few hours, perhaps days. Body hair had allegedly also become somewhat more pronounced than what would have been involved in such a short period of time. So that's a very interesting set of circumstances. Almost really literally unbelievable that she would be picked up in one location and deposited 790 kilometres later. So I've got 1,000 questions about this case. And so what we'll do now is we'll have a little bit of a listen to another interview that was done for the media in this case. But before I do that, I'll just introduce you to the principal characters of this case. So this was Amy, so 22-year-old, young blonde girl, and her husband Keith, who was 39 at the time, and their winery business partner Petra Heller. So this is Petra, and all three of them sitting down being interviewed for the events of what actually happened. And this is the location of the encounter. So it's just a caravan with a permanent built annex. Tried very hard to find the property. Even though it's a small area, I thought, gee, I might have a bit of luck here. I might be able to find it. But I didn't end up having any luck locating it. Well, I found a place that I thought it could have been. But the fact that this happened in 2001, that old caravan structure could easily have been taken away by, in that time. So I sort of found a property I thought could have been it, because this is the little house at the front in this particular image. Did find a place that looked like that. And the other issue you've got in a place like Gundia is the fact that Google Maps doesn't drive down all the roads, but basically goes down the main road, and that's about it. And this sort of shows you, in rough terms, also from this interview, that they were just to the west of Maryborough, and Mackay is at 790 kilometres further up the coast. And this is a bit more of an example of the actual media attention that it got. And Amy's scar is here on the inside of her right thigh. So that's the scar. So that's sort of a relatively typical sort of abduction mark, scoop scarring, three-pointed scar. And this is the window screen through which she was apparently taken through the window. And this is the bushes next to it. So you can see that bush to the left and on the right of that window, and the bush on the left has got that heat affected foliage on it. So that's the basics of it. I'll start the interview.
Right. Yeah, yeah, evidence.
So there you go. And the policeman interviewed in that particular clip was basically just laughing and treating it like it was a bit of a crazy story. So yeah, not sure what to think about that particular incident. And there's just so many aspects to it that are sort of still unknown to a certain extent. Like, if she was really in Mackay on that particular night and wandered into a petrol station, there should be a host of other witnesses that can actually be spoken to about that. And finding them today, 20 years later, and not even having their names, it makes it all very, very difficult. And there's probably other cases out there that I would rather spend my time on. And one of the ones I'm still working on is that incredible train encounter that occurred out in South Australia that I spoke about a few weeks ago. And I'm hoping to do another episode on that particular encounter because that really is an extraordinary incident where a train is stopped by an apparent UFO and the object dives into the nearby hills. So I'm still working on that particular case, and that'll be coming up in a future episode because I have found the original investigating uh, researcher who looked at that particular incident. So that will be in a couple of weeks' time. So with this particular case, the Amy Rylance case, something really people say extraordinary cases or claims require extraordinary evidence. Obviously, very true. So there's some rather extraordinary claims here. So you have to look at whether these three were publicity seekers. They were trying to profit from an alleged experience. Did this actually happen the way that they say it happened? You don't waste police's time. Well, you do so at your peril. If the police detect that you are indeed a time waster, you generally are charged for such behaviour, for wasting police time and resources. So I'm not sure if they were actually charged as a result of this, or whether the events stand as being as stated. A lot of people in the UFO community say that this is an outright hoax, that this event did not happen. But it does have all the hallmarks there, and some even beyond the hallmarks of being dropped off 790 kilometres further away, if it happened as per what they said. So today's episode has seen sort of like two extremes of the alien abduction experience in Australia. So the Longleys' experience in Casino, New South Wales, which is almost more of your classic style alien abduction, through to what is a extremely controversial encounter / events / potential hoax, attention seekers. So, which really does no benefit for people who have alien abduction experiences if you have these fake cases, like the potential Rylance one coming up. But I thought the event's so outlandish, and the people involved, and it's just it's worth talking about. So you can do more research on either of these two cases if you like. I just thought in this week's show I'd bring them out and air them, because these are all a long time ago now. 96, 2001 starts to be forgotten, but those interviews are on YouTube and they can be found. So as always, I say I'll let you be the judge of that. So thank you for joining me again for another episode of Unexplained Phenomena Australia. I'm about to go on vacation. So me and my wife are going to Vietnam for over a month, and I won't be back here with a new show until probably early mid-March. So thank you for joining me on the journey so far through 2022 and these first episodes of 2023. I've got a lot more coming up once I get back from my vacation in Vietnam, and I'll be refreshed and looking forward to bringing you some excellent new / old material, investigations that I've been working on. We'll see what else we can find. We'll probably also in future episodes go back and look at cryptids again, some ghost stuff. And the Australian experience is just so vast. That's what I've found in the time that I've been doing this show, that there is an extraordinary amount of paranormal activity here in Australia. And everything I bring you each week is really just the tip of the iceberg, what I can find about any of these particular encounters online, in books and even newspaper articles. We'll do the occasional interview as well. So thank you very much for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to seeing you again soon once I return from holiday, which I work full time. So I'm really looking forward to that. So that's all for now, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great night.